Dr. Jazz.
But speaking of all the guys, John and Mike Sarin and Frank Kimbrough, and I listened to Everything in a Dream today. I mean, I have that album, and I love the record and the writing you did on that one. And
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you your process of, let's say specifically of that record, but in any record that you did, like, what's your process when composing to start with this? Because I don't know, all these tunes, did it, and that Sintra thing, and it's all about the melody, and the melody seems to be so important, at least to what I hear in your music. I don't know how is your.
Well, the melody is very important to me, and everybody has a different focus. Like some people have rhythm focus, other people is different. But for me, melody is very important. I'm going to back up a little bit, and I'll try to address one specific. I meant to ask you this also. Is it going to be a test? Like, am I going to remember my own songs? Because that's like 15, 20 years ago.
I know,
now.
Exactly.
So I should have done a little homework knowing that you were going to ask me about those. But I will try to remember one specific thing about that recording session. But in general, I didn't grow up writing compositions or anything. But one thing that was very influential to me, I'm from around Washington, D.C. area. I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland. And there was a period of time when I went to Berkeley for a couple of years, and I just wasn't getting it, or I wanted to take a semester off, and I moved back home. And at Berkeley, it was helpful for me to learn theory and things like that, but I don't think I was around anyone. Well, there was one person that I was around at Berkeley that I felt a strong composer. He was from, I think, New Zealand, and his name was Phil Broadhurst. But other than him, I don't think I was around too many people, because everybody was into like, oh, let's learn, and it was great. Let's learn these Chick Corea tunes. Let's learn this. We had the real book basically, so we learned a lot of tunes out of the real book. And believe me, a lot of great compositions in there, no question. But everybody's trying to learn standards, and everyone's trying to. But the focus wasn't really so much on your own compositions. But I was very fortunate when I moved back to Washington, D.C., I met Frank Kimbrough, and also met Paul Bollenbeck, the guitarist.
Yeah, sure.
And both of those guys were composers. They had little manuscript books, and they wrote every day. And they would fill up those books, like, I don't know how many dozens of tunes that they would write.
Oh, man.
Like every day they would write something. And when we got together and jammed, we played their compositions. And it wasn't just all about them, because both of those guys were broad-minded. And, in the case of Frank Kimbrough, let's listen to Paul Bley. Let's listen to Keith Jarrett. Let's listen to this. We listened to a lot. Let's listen to Lenny Tristano. We listened to a lot of great music for years. Let's listen to Cecil Taylor. Let's listen to this. So it was like the antithesis of what I was learning at Berkeley, where everybody was like, they want to play like Chick Corea. They want to play like McCoy Tyner. They want to play like Herbie Hancock. They want to play like Bill Evans. Those are all great. And Frank loved all those players as well. But he had a whole big scope.
The Other World.
Weston, yes, Abdullah Ibrahim, Mal Waldron. These are just the piano players. He had a very wide net, and he exposed me to a lot of great music. And Paul was the same way. We would listen to Tal Farlow. Again, when I was at Berkeley,
under the radar players, right? I mean,
exactly.
But amazing guys. Yeah.
And again, when we would get together, it would be like, oh, I wrote these 3 or 4 tunes this week. Let's play them. And, it was just one amazing tune after the other. And so when I came to New York, it was just a few months after Frank came to New York. He's from North Carolina. He was from North Carolina. He lived in DC for a while with his trio. And he also, in his trio, was a bass player named Lyles West, who still lives in the around Dallas, Fort Worth area. And Lyles is a great composer also. And those two guys would just write and write and write. So when we came to New York, we didn't have any gigs. I worked a day job in a factory, and those guys, I don't know what they were doing, but they were basically sitting at home writing music all day. And again, whenever we got together, we would play their music, and I was just totally in awe of them. And that would have been around 1982. And then we were in New York for many, many years doing different things. You know, Frank did solo piano gigs. I did a lot of wedding gigs.
Sure.
And so it really wasn't until Frank met Ben Allison in the late 80s, maybe around 1990. And they did a duo gig or something, but Frank was telling me about Ben Allison. He's like, man, this guy writes some great music.
Yeah.
And for Frank to say that, you know, he didn't say that about a lot of people. He was like, man, this, and Ben was very young. He might've been like 23 or 24, just out of NYU. And Frank said, man, this kid writes some great music. And we got together and we just jammed. This was before Ben started the Jazz Composers Collective. Yeah. We would just get together and jam. Same thing. Frank would write great tunes, bring in stuff. Ben wrote great tunes, brought in stuff. We played it. And I was in awe of them, really. And Ben was at a little school where we could use the practice rooms, and he would invite all kinds of great players to come in. And we played, and one was a sax player you wouldn't know named John Schrader. And John was also a great composer as well. And so once we started getting together every week, and John would bring in a great tune, Frank would bring in a great tune, Ben would bring in a great tune. And Ron, what you got? Well, I transcribed this monk tune. Okay, we played that. And then I started getting into Andrew Hill. That's another one, you know, Frank introduced me to.
Yeah, we'll go there. Yeah, definitely have to.
And I said, oh, I transcribed this Andrew Hill tune. And Frank said, oh man, let's pull that out. And, you know, and he would be like, oh yeah, I know this one, you know, and Frank would play it beautifully, man, you know, whether I transcribed it correctly or not. And that was also the same time we were discovering Herbie Nichols' music.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And you know, he was Ben was inviting a lot of players: Ted Nash, Ethan Iverson, Jeff Hirschfield, Jeff Ballard, Matt Wilson, and everybody had, you know, their ideas on different music that they liked. So we shared a lot of music over 2 or 3 years. We played together a lot, and the collective wasn't really formed yet. And really, Ben had a couple of gigs for his group. It was his quintet with John Schrader, me, Frank, and Tim Horner was the drummer initially. And so that was my immersion into what it's like to be around a bunch of composers. And then when Ben formed the Jazz Composers Collective, then he started bringing in a lot of composers. You know, Ralph Alessi was one. Jeff Williams, the drummer, was another one. J and Ira Bloom, Pete Malinverni, John Gordon, on and on and on. Just, you know, one great composer after another. Lee Konitz was another one. And so we were playing their music. They were playing our music a little bit. And the next thing I knew, I was writing more and more and more. I could actually sit down and take in all these other influences and yet not copy anyone.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that was a long way of saying that was background to when I was writing my first CD was Genius Envy.
Genius Envy, yeah, I love that one.
Omnitone. Yeah. And that was the first time that I put all my compositions together on one CD. And that came because I used to agonize over each song. It would, you know, 3 weeks, you know, write one and then another version and erase that and start over again. And I'm very slow. I don't play piano very well. And then I ran into a musician by the name of Ron Kozak, and he said, you know what, man, you need to stop agonizing over every chord and every note. He said, you need to write it as fast as possible. You know, like there's a film of Pablo Picasso where he just paints right in front of the film. Have you ever seen it?
No, but yeah, I know about it. Yeah.
I mean, he just, you know, you're just watching him make a painting one after the other, you know, drawing or whatever. So I did that and I tried it and I was amazed. You know, it's like, wow, you're not second guessing yourself. You just write.
What comes out, yeah.
Yeah. And so that was the general thing in the background. But I will say about Everything in a Dream, there was one set of music that I was listening to, two actually. One was a set of Samuel Barber music called Hermit Songs. Mm-hmm. And that's a small, do you know it?
I know Samuel Barber, yeah, the adagios and all that. I love that stuff, man. I listen so much to that stuff, yeah.
Well, that's
beautiful stuff.
Adagio for strings is big orchestration.
And the piano stuff and solo piano. Yeah, we love it.
Knoxville, 1915, those are all beautiful. But Hermit Songs
is just
piano and voice.
Oh, wow.
And I think the original recording might have been him playing piano and Leontine Price singing. And the pieces are very short. They're like 1 minute long, a minute and a half long, 45 seconds long. And each one encapsulates a little vibe, you know. Mm. It's beautiful. So I was checking those out. And that led me to one of the songs, St. Ida's Vision. I wrote an arrangement of it on there. That's from those Hermit Songs.
Oh, well, okay.
And then the other thing that I one of the other things I was listening to was Olivier Messiaen.
Oh, yeah.
And O Sacrum Convivium is one of his. And that's it's a choral piece, but it's written in a very odd time signature or something like that. So I kind of rounded off the edges and made it into like a ballad. And I felt that I felt a parallel between like Billy Strayhorn and Messiaen. Like they used a lot of the same chord types, you know, not necessarily a progression, but I would play a voicing.
Voicings, yeah, kind of, yeah.
That's very Strayhorn-esque, you know, so.
Interesting.
Anyway, all those things kind of intrigued me. And I guess as part of my process, I would, since I'm not a good keyboard player, I relied on like a sequencer. So I would play things in very, very slowly and then loop it. And then I would spend time with it and then try to alter it so that it wasn't a copy of something. I would listen to it and put my own spin on it. And then along the way, I would just let the loop play while around the apartment, I would do something completely different, like wash dishes, fold laundry, or something else.
Yeah.
And then I would just kind of let it percolate. And then I would write a little more. And then the best part is that of working with Frank Kimbrough especially, is that I learned that if you write too much, he'll play everything that you write. But it's much better, I found that in the case of Frank or anybody like that, that if you write just enough for them to get the idea, then they're going to put something much better in there than you could ever have written.
Yeah,
and Frank was gifted that way.
Yeah, and he was such a player, man. Really, I mean, the trio stuff that he did, you know, and everything. It's just he's such an underrated player as well. I mean, like, you know. We musicians know, of course, who he was, but then like the wider audience, it's just like, I hope, you know, at least through these interviews and through that, we kind of spread his name also, because it's important, you know, it's,
And Frank had many different aspects to him. Like I knew him from what I described, you know, when we jammed and did small group stuff. And then when he started playing with Maria Schneider, many people knew him as like Maria Schneider's piano player. And he was amazing in that role as well. But I'm sure that there were a lot of people that saw him play with Maria or had records of him and didn't know that he was a composer.
Exactly.
And I knew that he was a teacher, but it wasn't until he passed away that I got to meet a lot of his students and hear a lot of his students. And I mean, it's incredible how great a lot of his students are and how much they adored him. It's really incredible. So
I love the trio records, you know, with band, and it's incredible stuff what he did. Yeah,
absolutely.
Such a player.
Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned attending Berkeley, like late 70s, and I wanted to ask you to go even back before, let's say mid 70s.
Okay.
In Washington, like, or even earlier. I don't know when was that moment. When was that moment for you for jazz trumpet that you heard, like, or whatever jazz improv it was that blew your mind? Do you remember that?
Well, I'll go back even a little further.
Okay.
I played when I was really young because my mother hated the television, and she hated the fact that everybody watched TV at night.
Good.
So yeah,
that's like me. I don't watch TV, man. It's like.
Good. I mean, at the time it was frustrating because all my friends would watch TV and then talk about it at school the next day. And I didn't watch TV, and they were like, "You didn't watch Gilligan's Island, or you didn't watch this, that?" And I was like, "No, my mom won't let me watch TV. And unless it was educational, she would let me do that." But instead of TV, we played music after.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So she played a little piano. She played a little violin. My one sister played a little clarinet, and we had music books, and we played music after dinner. Really, I mean, it's amazing. And so my dad played trumpet, and I didn't play anything at that time, but I wanted to play trumpet. So he taught me a little bit how to play trumpet. And the big famous names back then were Herb Alpert. Al Hirt was a fantastic trumpet player before a point in his life when somebody threw a brick at him and ruined his career. But Al Hirt, up until about 1971 or so, anything that he did was unbelievable. Just incredible. He did a lot of pop hits to make money, I'm sure, but he was a great player. So I already, by the time I was like 5 or 6, I knew that I wanted to play trumpet. Like, I didn't really know what jazz was until I had a trumpet teacher that he brought, as part of my lesson, he would come to my house. He would bring about 10 records every week.
Oh, wow.
And they were mostly trumpet. So, of course, he had Miles Davis, he had Freddie Hubbard, he had Fats Navarro, he had Donald Byrd, he had anything you could, and even like Bill Chase and Maynard Ferguson. And he would leave like 10 records each week. And I would listen to them each week, and maybe I would tape them or something. And then next week he would bring like 10 more, Wow. So he was basically lending me his record collection.
Well, that's the best. Yeah.
10 records at a time. So I would say that by the time I was about 13 or 14, I really wanted to do that. And we had a good jazz band in my junior high. And I knew probably by the time I was 16 or 17 that that's really, really what I wanted to do. And my parents were shocked. They were like, sure. You want to do what? I said, yeah, I want to be a musician. And they were like, that's crazy. And here they had been taking me to my lessons. My dad taught me how to play trumpet. They would come to all my concerts and, oh, yay, so good. And you sound great and all that. And then when I said I wanted to be a musician, they were like, that's crazy. Where did you get that idea? I was like, I thought that's what you wanted me to do or something. They're like, no, anything but that, but I did it anyway. And they reluctantly allowed me to go to Berkeley for a summer because that was okay. Summer is okay. And then I loved it so much that I said I wanted to go there after high school. And they were like, bad idea. And then when I dropped out, I didn't even go, I went 2 years, I dropped out, and they were like, wow, can't even stay with a music school, yeah, they were plenty disappointed. So
that's incredible. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Nice. I mean, this record collection, that's so important. Also, my classical guitar teacher was the same, I lost interest in classical guitar completely. And then he brought me records of Egberto Gismonti and Ralph Towner and all these guys. And
wow.
Pat Metheny and, and I was like, man, what is this? I want to learn that. I didn't know what they were playing, but it's just the sound,
Well, as a parallel to that, I started playing classical music. And that's what my mother really liked. She loved classical music. so for the years that I listened to classical music, my trumpet idol was Maurice André, who was a French trumpet player. Unbelievable. And as long as I was doing that, my mom was very supportive. Then, and also I had a classical trumpet teacher who was so classical that he hated jazz. He was the trumpet player that no, that jazz, that's a terrible, they play terribly, they're sloppy, they don't have a good sound. You don't want to do that. I did want to do that. And so I pissed off my teacher and my mom all at the same time when I said, I want to play jazz now. And, you know, but you do it, you follow what you want to do.
Oh, yeah, sure. Definitely. Yeah, definitely. You mentioned also coming to New York then after Frank a little bit later.
Yeah.
And like I've read I mean, I have that record Art and Aviation with you and Jane Ira Bloom.
Very good. Yeah.
I love that record, you know, it's the writing and everything. But I've read that you started playing with her like already, like initially, Jane, like how did it happen, that connection with her?
Well, it is an interesting connection. And it also goes back to that trio that I mentioned with Frank. They were a trio. It was called the Hands Trio. That was the name of the trio. They started in North Carolina. They came to Washington. The third member of the group was the drummer, Rich Rosenzweig.
Oh, and he's on Rich? Genius Envy, right? No.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay.
So Rich is more outgoing than I am. So he went to see Ira Bloom at the Village Vanguard, I would say probably 1984, maybe around there. And her band probably at that time was probably Fred Hirsch, Charlie Hayden, and Ed Blackwell.
Yeah.
I mean, what a band, right? And she was already like famous. I mean, at the Village Vanguard, like that's, she was at the Village.
Big one. Yeah.
I can't stop saying it. At the Village Vanguard, Ira Bloom. And so Rich saw the set and he went up to her. And he said something like, wow, you sound great. Would you like to get together with me and my friend Ron and play some music sometime? I wouldn't have that kind of nerve.
Oh, wow, man. Yeah.
And Jane said, sure. Where? When? Let's do it. And Jane was another great composer. So we played a little bit with Ratso Harris, the bass player.
Sure.
And, we just messed around and played, and Ratso also wrote compositions. So we just messed around and did that, and we never had any gigs. I think Rich and I bartered with a recording studio, and we got some free studio time. And believe it or not, Jane was up for that as well. Yeah, we did. We went into the studio and recorded some music, some of her tunes.
This quartet?
Yeah.
Oh, where do you have it?
I'm sure I have it somewhere.
Oh man, you should get that out.
Yeah.
Oh man,
I should pull that in. I haven't heard it.
Yeah.
And so Jane, in particular, I remember that she wrote a composition for the race car driver Shirley Muldowney. I think that was her name. And she described it. It was very hard to describe Jane's tunes because it would be like she would write like a shape, like all these notes. And so the rhythm session is going to do this, and you and I are going to go like, and we had a very tight synchronicity together, I think. And she must have recognized that. And then she asked me to do a gig with her, maybe 1985. And I remember that the bass player was Fred Hopkins.
Wow.
And the drummer may have been Jerry Hemingway. I can't quite remember. It was not Tom Rainey. It was not Tom Rainey, and it was not Jerry Granelli. But is Jerry on Art and Aviation?
I don't think so.
He just passed away. Okay, because Jerry,
or is it? Or is he? I know Formanek is on bass on a couple of things. Yeah.
And Kenny Wheeler plays.
Kenny Wheeler,
and Kenny Werner plays a little bit on there.
No, the drums.
It might be Jerry Granelli.
Yeah.
But in the late 1980s, maybe around 1990, she asked me, to be part of her quartet, and Jerry Granelli, the drummer, was a big part of that. And he was a very special drummer. He had played with Vince Guaraldi and people like that out on the West Coast. And he was a teacher at the Naropa Institute in Colorado and in Nova Scotia and in Germany. So he was flying between these places all the time.
Oh, man.
And he made time to play with Jane's group. And the various bass players were either Rufus Reed, Ray Drummond, Mark Dresser, and Mike Formanek, and maybe one other bass player. So it was a great group. And sometimes Thurman Barker played drums.
Really? Oh, wow.
But this is before the group. She's had this group that she's had for quite a while, but this was just before that. But it was after the group that she had with Fred Hirsch and the one I described with Ed Blackwell and Charlie Hayden. She had a great group for a long time with Ratso Harris and Tom Rainey.
Tom Rainey, yeah.
And maybe for a while, Kent McClagan played bass. And she did a couple of albums on Columbia. Fantastic. So
yeah. He's a beautiful composer. I mean, a beautiful, amazing player. I mean, but the compositions, I love that stuff. Yeah.
And one thing I can't stress enough, there are many great soprano sax players. Jane not only has one of the best soprano sax sounds.
Yeah.
She has an identifiable sound. Like when I hear one or two notes, I know it's Jane.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I find distinctive about all the great horn players that there are these days. I mean, hundreds, if not thousands of great horn players. However, not many of them have a distinct sound like earlier generations. And you know what I mean? If you hear two notes of Ben Webster, it's like, wow, Ben Webster right there. Stan Getz. Lester Young, Charlie Parker, on and on and on. Hundreds and hundreds of players from that era. And one of the reasons I understand it to be is that it was just not very hip to try to sound like somebody else.
Exactly.
They really didn't, the older cast didn't dig that. It's like, no, man, you got to get your own thing together.
Yeah.
And Jane had her own sound, man.
Yeah.
From an early age. I probably met her when she was in her mid or late 20s. She already had her sound. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. But speaking of sounds, you know, you mentioned Kenny Wheeler, and he's one of the. How was that story with Kenny in Jane? How did that connection happen? Do you remember? I mean, and how was your attitude towards Kenny? I mean, because he's for me one of the greats. You know, like
he is one of the greats. Well, I think it was an interesting situation. I mean, Jane loved Kenny's playing. And he wasn't, I was probably available to do like some gigs in and around New York. Mm. But when she would do something else like international stuff, Kenny was the guy that she would call. And what a great, great call. I mean, they played some stuff together that was just unbelievable. And Kenny could do it on the fly. I mean, I would rehearse with Jane, rehearse. Kenny could come in with little or no rehearsal and play all the stuff that I had been working on for 6 weeks. And it's more than just sight reading, you know what I mean? It's not just notes on a page. It's again, that kind of simpatico, that synchronicity. He had that with Jane also. So, Kenny was my idol, man. And so soft-spoken.
Yeah.
I have one little funny story if I can.
Oh, please, please, sure. Please.
About art and aviation. There's a lot of free improv on there, and everybody in that group is totally well versed in free improv. So we would do one of Jane's compositions, and we play the head, blah 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 blah, and get to the improv section, and everybody's going for it, and Kenny would put his horn down in his lap. And he's a very soft-spoken guy. He didn't say anything, just have his horn in his lap. And that happened once or twice. And then Jane would say, she'd stop and she'd say to Kenny, Kenny, feel free to, get right into it, And so we would do it again, and he would again put his horn, and he would say, oh, okay, I will. And then we'd do it again, and he'd put his horn in his lap when it got to the improv section. And Jane stopped, and she goes, Kenny, is everything okay? And he goes, I don't want to practice free improvisation. So that's what he was just being nice, but he didn't want to blow his whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet, when we went into the studio the next day, I mean, he's full force. I mean, unbelievable. But that's another. It's similar to Frank in a way, Frank Kimbrough, because at a rehearsal, Frank may only give you just a little bit about what you need. Andrew Hill, the same thing. At a rehearsal, he may give you next to nothing, you know, and you're thinking like, is something wrong? Is something weird? But then on the gig or the recording, 110%. Man. So that's for, I'm sure you've worked with people that they want everything at the rehearsal like they think it's going to be on the gig. They want every hit. They want every voicing. They want the solo order.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's fine too. You know, that's a certain thing. But
I prefer the other, like you mentioned. It's, you know, I did my first record in New York with Malaby. I mean, what a band, with Malaby, Mark Elias, and Tom Rainey. And
oh my God.
We rehearsed at Elias's place.
Uh-huh.
Behind his kitchen table. So Tom had like, you know, I don't know, a pen and a coffee mug. He sounded awesome, man. We just ran through the heads, you know. And the next day we recorded it in 2 hours in Systems 2. And that was just through the heads. Yeah, what's there? And I was like, man, how do you guys do that? You know, like that's.
Yeah. Both of those guys, they're on that. There's certain guys that are on that level, and they don't need to come in and, you know, play every note. They just talk through it, really.
Yeah.
And it's a great experience to be on that level.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Mark Turner is another one.
Yeah.
You know, we would do a rehearsal, and he didn't have to solo. I mean, he would if you told him to. You know, Mark, you solo here, okay. But if you don't tell him to, he's like, I got it. It's cool. I don't need to. Really hard music too. They don't need to.
Yeah.
So it's one of the. I like to say that, you know, I feel like I've had the best seat in the house. You know what I mean? It's not the front row of the theater or the front row of the club, the front table. It's being on the bandstand with these cats, and they are on just what you experienced. They're on a super duper high level.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's incredible. The level of, I mean, of all of you guys. I mean, it's just my experience with you know, I wrote like years ago like a quartet with Lauren Stillman and John O'Gallagher, and me on guitar. So it was like 2 altos, guitar and drums.
Wow.
And we had a first rehearsal in Zurich on the day of the gig, and those guys just came in, Lauren and John from New York.
Yeah.
You know, like, okay, so yeah. But, you know, side red, like it was only odd meters, like only, and side red everything played like, you know, it was like, man, you know, I'm a guitarist, so I'm not a really good side reader as like, you know, I try, but if you give me like the complex odd meter stuff, I have to practice it, you know. But John was just like Lauren, just like, oh man, sorry. I screwed up like one note there. I was like, really? You know, it's just incredible.
Yeah, Lauren Stillman is another one on, you know, and he's younger than a lot of the other cats we're talking about.
Yeah.
Can I tell you my Lauren Stillman story?
Oh, please, man.
Do you know who Bob Meyer? Do you know who Bob Meyer is, the drummer?
Sure.
So Bob was like his mentor, you know, and he would kind of take him around to places, you know, and one of the places that he took Lauren to when he was, I think, 14 is we did a jam session with Jamie Baum, and she had a rehearsal studio at Westbeth. I don't know if you ever played with her.
No, I know her. I have her records, and
Right. So we played a session, me, Jamie, Bob, and I forget who the bass player was, and he brought Lauren along. And Lauren had his alto, but he had school books too. So there was a chair or a couch or something like that. So for the whole session, Lauren was studying his school books, you know, because he had like a test the next day or something like that. And then Bob said, can Lauren sit in? And we're like, sure, you know. and he pulled out his horn and he just blew us all completely away. I mean, completely. And I was like, whoa, man, you know, he was 14.
Yeah.
So it was quite an experience. And then I got a chance to be a part of a couple of groups with him. And
oh, really? Oh, wow.
one of them was, you know, the drummer Billy Mintz.
Yeah, sure.
John O'Gallagher may have been the main guy, but Lauren subbed a couple of times. But there was one band that never got off the ground, and this is that person I mentioned, Ron Kozak, sax player. I mentioned him about composition.
Mm-hmm.
He had a band that had, it was Ron on woodwinds, me, Lauren Stillman, Russ Lossing.
Oh, wow, man. Oh.
Yeah. Scott Lee on bass.
Wow.
And Bob Meyer on drums. And we used to rehearse in a basement in a church. And I think Lauren was probably 15 at the time. And already he was, I mean, amazing. So.
Yeah, that's beautiful to hear. Yeah, stuff like that. I mean, you know, he's playing now like incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, such a player. He might come to Europe next September. He just emailed me last month. So I hope we get together and at least play something. Yeah.
I hope so too. You may see him more often than I do. Did he move out of the city to get?
Yeah, he's in Montana now. He's in Montana, so for 2-3 years already, I think. So yeah.
Well, you might talk to him before I do, but tell him I said hi.
I will definitely. Yeah, Ron, I wanted to ask you. Otherwise, you know, we mentioned a couple of times Genius Envy before.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask you, how did that record happen? Like, when did you decide to become a band leader? When was that moment for you? You know, I guess one thing led to another through the Jazz Composers Collective, but like, how did that happen actually?
Well, I think we all want to be a leader in our mind, you know, but then the reality of being a leader is what we were talking about, like breaking even is like the goal of being a band leader.
Yeah.
But what happened was, excuse me, I'm going to cough. The Jazz Composers Collective was really making a buzz for a little while, and everybody was interested in it. Not everybody, I mean, you know, but people were interested in different aspects. Ben was recording on Palmetto Records.
Yeah.
Frank had already done some things on Igmod, I think, which is an independent label. Ted Nash was doing things on different labels, and maybe as the collective, Herbie Nichols, maybe we had done some things on Soul Note and Koch Records or something like that, and Palmetto. And so there was someone named Frank Tafuri. I don't know if you're familiar with Frank at all.
Mm-hmm.
He was, I believe, from Cincinnati. And when he moved to New York, he had something to do with distributing or promoting Soul Note Black Saint records, which of course we all admire. I mean, the players on there, their sessions, fantastic. And so he mentioned that he was going to start and do his own thing, his own label, which was Omnitone.
Omnitone. Oh, okay.
And I was one of the first people he asked to do it. And later he asked Marty Ehrlich. Yeah. Frank and Joe Locke did their duo, couple of duo records on there. Tom Varner.
Pete McCann, right? He also did, I think.
I think so. I think so.
I think I've heard Pete, yeah.
And then Frank moved out of New York. I don't know if he continued recording people, but it only lasted for a few years. And Frank's heart is in the right place. He lived right in Brooklyn. And, but I think a record label is just a hard thing to keep going.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. That's how that started. And, you know, that session was done at Michael Burby's studio. I don't know if you know Michael.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And yeah, it was a lot of fun. And John McKenna was the tenor player. John moved on to, I guess he does more graphic stuff. He moved up to, I want to say Vermont or somewhere. Moved out of the city anyway. We had a lot of fun together. Yeah.
Are you being a band leader? are you comfortable in a role of band leader, or how have you developed this through the years? Like
I think during the years that I was with the collective, it was easier because Ben structured our concert series that there were 5 composers in residence, as he called it. Me, Frank, Ben, Ted Nash, and Michael Blake. I think those were the 5. And so we had a concert series of like 5 or 6 concerts. It started at the Greenwich House Music School on Barrow Street, I think, and then it moved to the new school. And Ben structured it so that it was always one composer in residence plus a guest composer. So it would be maybe Ben's group and then maybe Peggy Stern's group, or Frank's group and then Jane Ira Bloom, or something like that. So I knew that I had at least one gig a year, and I was expected to write some new compositions each time, which is not always easy, but we were talking about that. So that was easier, and we did our concerts at the new school. When it came to like getting other gigs, options at that time were Visiones. I don't think I ever got a gig there. Seth at the Jazz Standard was very receptive to the collective. We did a lot of what we called festivals there, where we would do like an entire week, and Ben would present like 10 different sets of music there, each, and everybody got a chance. So I was a leader in that capacity because it was kind of part of the structure. But getting a gig on my own, I was never able to do that. I never was really successful at getting gigs elsewhere, but I never really pursued it either. Like I wouldn't go to the Vanguard or the Blue Note or any places like that. It's just, they're not going to want somebody like me. And other places like the 55 Bar, I could have, I guess, but I don't know. Maybe there was a time when I wanted to, but I don't know. I felt that there's always pressure to bring in people, and I have never really warmed up to social media. I'm not against it. It's just that it's very time consuming, it sounds like, to develop a following and a list. And I don't think I'm able to devote that kind of time. So, sorry, I'm going to cough again. Sorry. So when a club owner says, can you guarantee that you're going to bring in 75 people or something like that? Quite honestly, I couldn't do that.
Sure.
However, I did lead groups at like collective spaces like I-Beam. Do you know that space in Brooklyn?
Yeah.
And also Scholes Street studio in Brooklyn. So those kinds of things where it's kind of a, you maybe rent the space or you share the bill with somebody.
Yeah.
That's usually the extent of it, unless somebody asks me. Like somebody was curating, there was a time when Tim Horner and I had co-led a 10-piece group. That's another money-losing proposition, but we loved it, and it was a great band too. But somebody at the Stone was curating, and they asked us to be part of that. So anytime somebody asks me, I always say yes.
Sure.
But I think the hardest thing for me is to, hire somebody to go booking gigs and then not being able to say, I'll get 150 people in there. I can't guarantee that.
Sure.
And I have I know it's not satisfying for me or the band or anybody if I don't promote it and there's only 5 people in the audience. Then it feels a little weird to everybody. So
I agree.
I think that's my issue.
Interesting. Yeah, no, just you wrote such beautiful music on these records, so
and that's what I like. That's what I like to do.
Looking forward to a new one when it comes. So that's also why I'm asking.
Well, the next thing that I have is actually something old. Some of the last composing that I did was a few years ago, and it does include John O'Gallagher and Frank and Dean Johnson and Tim Horner and Marty Ehrlich and Mark Momas. I don't know if you know Mark.
Yeah, sure. Wow, beautiful.
So I will get around to editing that and making that. It's almost 2 CDs worth of music. So
wow, beautiful.
Yeah. That's been on the top of my list to get to that. And the guys in the band asked me, "So what did you do with that music?" And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Oh, super! Looking forward to hear that.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, but otherwise, Ron, I wanted to ask you. We mentioned him already, Andrew Hill, and he seemed to be. I mean, he's so important, I guess, in your career. And
sure.
You said you transcribed his compositions already. Back in the 80s, and I'm a huge Andrew Hill fan. Like when I do these talks, like I try to ask everyone about him. I transcribed also his compositions, and I tried.
Did you?
Yeah, you try, and then you bring them to a session, and probably the heads or the chords are wrong or something, but doesn't matter. It's just like his spirit and the idea. I love what he did. And what was your connection with Andrew? How did that connection happen, and how was it for you, since you basically, he was, I guess, one of your heroes in the 80s when you transcribed him?
Well, it was an unbelievable experience. And again, I'll back up a little bit, and I have Frank Kimbrough to thank for that as well. Frank and Andrew knew each other quite a ways back, possibly the late 70s or early 80s, because Frank had seen Andrew play, possibly as part of like a piano package or something, like maybe 3 or 4 solo pianists have been on one thing, and maybe Paul Bley was on it, and maybe I don't know who the other ones were, maybe Mel Waldron or Abdullah Ibrahim, I'm not sure. But anyway, he knew Andrew for many years, and they stayed in touch. And Andrew, of course, was from Chicago. He lived in New York for many years and recorded in New York for many years. And then he spent many years on the West Coast, in the Bay Area, and then later in Portland, where he had a teaching position. But he got remarried to Joanne, his second wife, and she was living on the East Coast. So Andrew moved back in the early 90s. So I had been transcribing, and an interesting thing that you mentioned, we try to transcribe. It's difficult. And that's one of the mysteries, is like, what the hell is going on in there, And so I would try to be accurate, and he plays this voicing here, and I'm not a piano player. I really not very good at it. And it goes back to what I was saying before about Frank, and that is that you don't need to give Frank every voicing. You don't need to give Frank everything. Frank just knows, like if he knows the tune and I give him a very close approximation, then Frank is going to either fill it in, or he's going to do his own thing, and it's going to be great. It's going to be great. A lot of that kind of thing that I'm talking about, like how much you give somebody or how little you give somebody, is trust. And I'll get to that as far as drummers and Andrew.
Please,
but anyway, so for a few years, I transcribed Andrew tunes, and Frank did too. He transcribed Snake Hip Waltz and used to play that a lot. And but when we would get together at a session, he would play my Andrew transcriptions, and oh man, we just loved it. We would just be like, God, this is just beautiful, man.
Yeah.
I mean, Andrew's period of composing went all the way from the early 60s until he died, and he had many different periods of writing, and each period was beautiful, And so when Andrew moved back to the East Coast, he moved to Jersey City. The collective was doing our concerts at the Greenwich House Music School. We were maybe doing Herbie Nichols music or something, and Andrew came to one of the concerts. And Frank introduced me to Andrew, and I remember we had a conversation about something not really about the music, but kind of about the music. It had to do with like publishing and the rights. So and then we didn't see each other. I don't think we exchanged numbers or anything, but Frank must have told him that I had been transcribing a lot of his music because Andrew was interested in that. And so Frank said, Andrew wants to meet you. And we met. He said, Andrew wants to get together with you and play through your transcriptions. And I was
man.
I was like, yeah, I know. I was like, wow, that's going to be a great opportunity for me. I'm going to bring in my approximations and Andrew's going to fill in the blanks, right? That's what I thought. So I took like this stack of like maybe 30 transcriptions out to his place, and he sat down and he just put my transcriptions up on the piano and he started playing through them. And I thought he was going to say like, oh, should be E-flat-7 or something. It wasn't like that at all. He'd slowly play through something and then he would go, like that's good. He was playing through it like it was somebody else's music.
Incredible.
Like he didn't seem to recognize that he had written these. He would say, like, I like that. And then he also had a red pencil and he started changing things. And at first I thought, oh, he's going to be correcting stuff. And then I realized he's changing stuff that I knew that was correct.
He's rewriting it
to incorrect or something. Yeah. So I was,
wow, man.
So I was like, this isn't really what I thought it was going to be, but it is interesting. And then after he played through a bunch, I said something like, so do you have your copies? Can I see yours? And he said, oh no, I haven't had those for 40 years, And what had happened is that he had moved so many times that he had just left music behind. And sure. I said, well, do any of the guys like that played with you, like Larry Ridley or Joe Chambers, do they have your music? And he said, oh no, you were giving them originals. There was no Xerox machine back then. So it was, you don't keep the music then, you hand it back because it's all handwritten, So basically his music didn't exist in too many places.
Oh, wow.
But that's how we met. And then at that time he was playing, he had a group with a trio with Reggie Workman and Ferron Oklaf. And that was a trio that they had for a while. And then there was a group that he had similar at the time with Rufus Reed on bass and Benny Maupin on sax. And I'm not sure on drums, maybe Ronald Shannon Jackson. Is that possible? We're really not sure. And Andrew started playing some of my music on those gigs. And they sounded completely different than what I had transcribed. I mean, he put a different vibe on everything. And then Frank told me that Andrew was thinking about putting a different kind of band together, not the guys Andrew's age, but like younger guys. And I was like, wow, and I forget who called who or who did what, but we had one rehearsal at Baldwin and the original, I know Andrew and I must have gotten together beforehand because he had some ideas for music and he was not really adept at writing things out. So he was asking my help to do that, which I did. And then Dusk in particular was my arrangement. I had done that for something. Yeah. And what it was is he had the previous year or two done a solo piano concert in France. And I forget the names of the name of that CD, but he had done 2 solo versions of Dusk. So I liked part of his solo on one and part of his solo on the other. So I wrote the head out, but the middle part of Dusk that you hear the horns playing like, that's Andrew's solo, actually, a composite that I orchestrated. Okay. So, I just threw it in the mix and he said he liked it and Dusk became, something that we all like to play.
Wow.
And, but that first rehearsal, the band was Marty Ehrlich, Jay Collins, Scott Colley, and Billy Drummond.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And Andrew said very little. And he played not much. And when we did the sound check for our first gig at the Jazz Standard, Jay Collins asked Andrew, he said, Andrew, I'm not really hearing all the changes of this one tune. I forget which one it was. He said, can you lay down the changes so I can really hear them? And Andrew went, oh, sure. And they played through it, and Andrew played every chord as clear as a bell. You could hear it beautiful. And then when we did the gig, Andrew didn't play at all.
Oh, man. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I mean, not for the whole gig, but I mean, for that section that Jay wanted to hear. He just was like, you had it at the sound check, but now you're not going to hear it. So, and Andrew had a thing. He didn't, like, Jay was playing in a certain way, and when Andrew was giving him all the chords at the sound check, Jay was like, oh man, great. Like he could really dig in and play all the changes, and he was into it. And it turns out Andrew doesn't like that. He doesn't like guys to play all he called them licks. He goes, I don't like guys playing licks, So he felt that anything he could do to kind of pull the carpet out from under you, he could do that. As a matter of fact, on one gig when Greg Tardy was in the band, Greg had his music on the stand during the sound check, and then mysteriously the entire book disappeared.
Oh, I think Greg told me that. Yeah, I think he told me that once. Yeah.
And that's what Andrew liked, man. He liked people to be totally uncomfortable, I guess.
But that's good for the music, right?
It can be good. I'm glad it didn't happen to me. After every sound check, I put my music under my arm after that. I don't want anybody hiding my music,
Sure. But how did that beautiful day happen? How was that like? Because that was a big one.
A beautiful day was a different thing. I'll get to that in a minute. But just as far as the sextet goes, it had some very interesting elements. Andrew was writing for that group, and that was a good sign that he was inspired by the group, and every gig or whatever, he would bring something out. But it wasn't always that clear. And another little story, Marty and I still laugh about this. Andrew put out, and nothing that Andrew wrote was very big, half a page at most. And we played through it, and we just sounded confusing each time. And then Marty looked at my part, I looked at his. Well, he's got 12 bars between letter A and letter B, and I've got 13 bars. And so one of us raised our hand and said, Andrew, is it 12 bars or 13 bars between A and B? And Andrew looked up and he goes, oh, it's whatever you think. And that was like a non-answer. And then he ended by saying, okay, so that'll be the first tune that we do tonight. And so that's what we opened with, totally unresolved, But Andrew loved that, He was spontaneous in that way that we're talking about times 100, that he preferred, discomfort or something, because he felt that if that happened, then everybody has to rely on each other much more. And I would say that that's true. There were many times I felt like I got up on the stand and I was like, oh God, what's going to happen here? And, everybody is such a great player and supportive that we made something happen. But, there were many little stories like that. But the sextet evolved, and Dusk, the album, was very early on in the sextet's, early in its life.
Story, yeah.
And I'm fortunate that people in Europe sent me CDs recorded live of the band during that time, because the sextet really evolved. The later version of it became John Hebert, Nashit.
Yeah.
There was a time when Aaron Stewart was playing saxophone.
Oh, really? Oh, man.
Do you know Aaron?
Yeah, he's such a player, man. Yeah.
Where is he now? Have you heard of him in the last several years?
I just haven't known him from records, but he was like one of the freshest voices when he came out, like, those mid 2000 kind of or earlier even.
He used to play with Vijay Iyer.
Yeah, with Taishan also, I think.
Yeah. And we, and he made a special thing happen in the band. And
oh, really? I didn't know. Wow.
And then I don't know what happened to him. I think Greg Tardy came back, and we had a lot of nice gigs. And then Andrew decided to do quartet after that.
Yeah.
So, but we had the sextet really had some very special concerts towards its later time. I'm trying to think when that would have been, maybe 2000, I don't know, 2002, 2003, something like that.
You guys toured a lot, like in Europe also, or?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, beautiful. Yeah.
I know that we played at Saalfelden together.
Oh, really? Oh, man.
Maybe Berlin Jazz Festival.
Oh, beautiful.
And I can't remember the others, but like I said, somebody was nice. They were kind of anonymous. They would just send me a CD in the mail, and I could tell it was recorded off the board of wherever we were performing. And I mean, super high quality, and the band sounds great. And Marty Ehrlich always said this. Matt Ballesteros he was the owner of Palmetto Records.
Palmetto, yeah.
And he's the one that put out Dusk. Marty said to Matt, he said, you know what? You should really re-record the sextet. It sounds really great. But that never happened. So then that goes to A Beautiful Day. So Andrew was writing some big band music. He was, I forget what they call it when you go to like an artist colony, and you're basically given like a cabin, and they just want you to write music all the time. So he did that in a place in Italy, which is why the name of one of them is called Bellizia Apposita, I think. And so Andrew, again, he had difficulty writing out music. So the Jazz Composers Collective, I had done a whole concert of big band arrangements of Andrew's music. And Andrew came to it, and we were hoping that Andrew would sit in with us. That would have been great, but he declined to do that. He just sat and listened, but he loved it. And then he decided that he wanted to do his own version of a big band. So he wrote this music, and he asked me to arrange it with him. And it was totally different than what I had written. He wrote in little, I don't know if you call them cells or
cells, kind of. Yeah, okay.
And, he would write like 13 bars and then have a free section, and then write something that resembled a background and some more free improv, and have somebody improvise even over the written stuff. So it was very murky, is this written or is it improvised? And then he would have like group improv and, some written stuff underneath. It was pretty wild.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about that too, because he would give me stuff on a certain app that doesn't exist anymore, called Freestyle. It was written by MOTU, Mark of the Unicorn, but they don't do it anymore. And you could literally take like an entire section of music, and you could copy it and then superimpose it on top of each other. So,
wow.
So Andrew would give me stuff that had superimposed stuff on top of each other. And part of my job was to kind of dissect it and see how I could make that work. Yeah, I mean, it was wild. Wow. And also, I conducted that, but Andrew didn't like he didn't want me to conduct the way I was used to conducting. 1, 2, 3, 4, downbeat. No, he didn't want that. He said, conduct more like you're a choir director. I was like, what's the difference? And he got up in front of the band, and he didn't count off at all. He just took his hands and he went, oh, I see if I can back up. Like maybe he had written something that was like, da, da, dee, da, 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 something like that. And I conducted it like that. It's in full 4. And he's like, no. Conduct it more like a choir. And I was like, I'm not sure what you mean. So he got up from the piano and he came up in front of the band, and he just put up his hands, and then he just dropped them. And the whole band went like, and we all laughed hysterically for like 5 minutes. And I said, you want me to conduct like that? And he goes, no, conduct the way you want. But I said, you don't have to do it metrically. That's what he didn't want. But it was such a great experience. And also, he had admired one of the charts that I had written called Divine Revelation, which he kept calling Little John. Andrew had different titles for the same composition, or he'd use the same title and write different compositions using the same title. Very, very confusing.
Yeah.
But he kept calling this Little John. He said, "Bring Little John to the first rehearsal." I was like, "Little John? I didn't write it." He said, "Oh, the one that goes da 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 da." I said, "Oh, that's Divine Revelation." Yeah, that one. Bring it. So I brought it, and a lot of the same guys were in the band. Like, he had asked me to call maybe 2/3 of the guys that I knew, mostly the brass section, but he wanted to call his sax guys: Marty Ehrlich, Greg Tardy, J.D. Perrin, a sax player named John that he knew out in Portland, John Savage, maybe. I forgot his last name. I'm sorry, and so on. And so anyway, it was mostly my band though. But he said, "Bring my chart." So it was mostly my band, my chart, and I was getting ready to count it off, and it goes one, ba da 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 da. It's like funky and everything. And before I counted off, Andrew goes, "No, wait," and he walked all around the room, and he started taking music away from people.
Oh, man.
Mostly the Barry sax player, the bass trombone player, the drummer, who was probably not Nasheed. It may have been Daphnis Prieto. And he whispered a little something in each of their ears. And I don't know what he whispered. And he goes, "Okay, now count it off." And I counted off, and it was completely different.
Wow.
I don't know what he did exactly or what he said exactly, but it was completely different. I mean, you cannot imagine a transformation of the same chart with a lot of the same musicians, taking a little music away, and Andrew saying a little something in your ear.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah.
So that was quite an experience for me, that you don't have to do something the same way twice.
Yeah, these are the greats. I mean, come on, he was, I mean, one of the, also I would say underrated greats. It's like all these guys. It's again like you mentioned all those piano players before. Like when you said about Berkeley, they're all incredible. They are, it's no doubt about it. But then you have like, what Herbie Nichols. I love Herbie Nichols, like, and Andrew Hill, all these guys who wrote amazing compositions. But we know them kind of, or maybe the jazz circle, very narrow one knows them. But
well, in Andrew's case, and also Herbie Nichols, thank God that one of the two Blue Note guys, whatever, Francis Wolf or the other one. Thank God they saw something in Andrew, because he recorded like 6 albums in like 18 months, those first 6 albums, but that was only the tip of the iceberg. I mean, I don't know if you know that they recorded throughout the 60s, and that stuff stayed in the vaults until like a year or two before he died. Passing Ships, that didn't come out until like a year or two before he died.
Oh, really? Didn't even aware of that one.
That stuff was in the vaults, some of it, for 50 years. And, Andrew had just recorded so much. It was just coming out of him like a fountain,
Yeah.
And they would release it a little at a time. Like in the 70s, they released some. In the 90s, they released some. And then in the mid-2000s, they released the last of it. But thank God they... I mean, it's bad that they kept it that long.
Yeah.
Thank God that they recognized that he was brilliant.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Cool, Ron.
So, all right.
Thanks so much for sharing. I'll give you a nice Sunday afternoon. So.
All right. Well,
I'm take more of your time.
Thank you for asking me to do it. I also meant to check out a lot of the other interviews that you've done as well.
Dr. Jazz.